The stars had never felt so close to Commander Celica. She stood at the crest of the pelagic spire, a cathedral of glass grown from living coral, and watched the midnight skin of the Pacific breathe in silver swells. 2,600 years had passed since the last human ship abandoned Earth. In their absence, the triune stewardship, her people of the Thal, ocean-born, the hive cities of the Mer, and the storm dancers of the Solari, had coaxed a poisoned world back into song. They called it duty, and they carried it like a prayer. Commander, the calm organ in her gill ridge thrummed. Deep sky picks up an approach. Confidence 99. Formation density abnormal. Celica closed her black pearl eyes. She had asked for 1 hour of quiet to review the morning's algae bloom reports and to bathe in the old currents that knew nothing of councils or mandates, but work never stopped. Route to the spire. The hollow of the tower dimmed. A lattice of light unfolded, sketching the system's edge in lines of cold fire. At first the objects looked like a dusting of salt across the dark, then the numbers resolved. Hundreds, each massed like a fortress, each breaking with precision that mocked the best math of the triune. They were not comets, they were not accidents, they were a fleet. How long? 18 days to Neptune's gate, 21 to low Earth if they follow posted approaches. Identification. Telemetry fingerprints do not conform to any triune registry. However, the voice faltered. Even a machine could learn to fear. However, the harmonic profile of their drives corresponds to phase shift arrays recovered from old Terran ruins at the Keto site. Humans. The word had been a ghost for 1,000 generations, a shape at the corner of every history lesson, quarrelsome, clever, catastrophic. Records claimed they had burned their sky and fled into the dark to die. The triune had found no bodies when they arrived, only forests of steel and warnings carved into stone. We will return when we can be better. Celica tasted iron in the water pipes, an old Thal sign for storm. Push High Council priority. Summon the Steward of Coasts and the High Voices. No alarm, not yet. She rode a spine rail down the tower's throat. Outside, the capital, New Manila, glittered across the archipelago like a necklace of dawn. Merhive spires rose on Luzon's plains where terraced rice once climbed. Solari filaments braided themselves into lightning kites and wrote poetry in the monsoon. Earth, blue and stubborn, had learned to live with 3 peoples who were not born here. They had mapped currents, seeded reefs, rebuilt rivers, tuned air. They had carved their lives into the planet carefully, like guests who planned to stay forever without breaking the furniture. In the council amphitheater, the arguments began before the delegations finished seating. Law versus belonging, defense versus diplomacy, fear versus pride. Celica spoke less than she listened. She watched the feed from deep sky again and again, the way those ships bled no waste heat, the way their formation geometry adjusted micro by micro to the breathing of the solar wind, as if the fleet listened to the star itself. On the 10th day, the first message came, spoken in clear triune standard, every tone perfect and unsettlingly warm. This is Admiral Eliza Hart of the Terran Homeward Fleet. We are inbound to Sol. We request the convening of a diplomatic board to negotiate transition of planetary administration. Time is limited. People in the chamber forgot to breathe. Transition, not discussion. Administration, not residence. It was the voice of someone returning to a house with a key in their hand. Celica replayed it alone that night 27 times, while the waves slid their cold tongues against the pylons. She tried to convince herself of misinterpretation, of translation drift, of a prank born from legend. But the ocean was old and honest, and even the sea did not lie to her. The owners of the promise had come to collect it. She opened a private file she had never expected to use. The stewardship mandate had an appendix for this. The lines were clear and cruel. If the founding species returns in force and in health, the stewards must yield with dignity and bargain only for mercy. Celica stared at the sentence until it blurred. Yield with dignity, bargain for mercy. She closed the file and watched the tide swallow the last lights of New Manila's seawalls. The wind raised a hush over the water that felt horribly like a held breath. They met at the edge of the system under the cold green light of Neptune. The Triune sent their finest diplomatic craft, luminous and spined like a lanternfish. The humans sent something that swallowed starlight. It was not a battleship as Celica knew them. It was sculpture with intent. Its hull surface flowed, not like liquid, but like thought deciding what to be. Docking took hours. The human ship examined every vibration in the Triune hull, then softened its own airlock ring until both vessels breathed in sync. When the doors sighed open, Admiral Eliza Hart stepped through, tall beyond old human records, shoulders squared the way mountains square themselves against wind. Her skin held a faint metallic sheen where the light caught, and motes of silver tracked in her eyes like drifting snow. "Commander Celica," she said, offering a hand. "Thank you for meeting with us." Celica gripped carefully, warm, alive, strong as engineered truss. "Admiral." The human delegation moved like they were all listening to one conductor. Their clothing shifted with them, becoming formal when they paused, pliant when they walked. A low hum lived in the air, almost too faint to notice. Only when Celica tuned the organ in her gills did she realize it was coming from inside the humans themselves, microreactors braided into bone. "We recognize you have made homes here." Admiral Hart began after pleasantries that felt like raindrops before a monsoon. "We recognize stewardship performed in good faith. We are grateful. Grateful. As if the Triune had watered a garden for a neighbor who'd been away too long. Under Triune law," said high-voice Carrot of the Mer, 3 billion citizens hold standing on Earth. It is our legal domicile. Under Terran oath, Hart replied, not unkindly, "Earth has never ceased to be our home. We departed to keep a promise to our descendants, that we would return stronger, wiser, and worthy." She gestured. Holography unfolded the night, 47 star systems marked with Terran sigils, webbed in trade, defense, and migration routes. We adapted to deserts without water, to shadows without warmth, to suns that bathe everything in hard radiation. We learned to edit our bodies the way our ancestors edited their books. A Marine at her back lifted their side of the conference table one-handed, held it politely so a Mer aide could recover a fallen stylus, and set it down without a sound. Hart did not look at the feet. For her, it was exposition rather than spectacle. Carrot clicked echoes of frustration. "If your empire is so wide, why this planet?" Hart's gaze cut to the viewport where Earth shone small and unbearably blue. "Because no map is a home. Because our first word for beauty was this sky. Because our dead asked us to plant our feet here again. We have prepared relocation for your peoples, 12 worlds tuned to oceanic hive and plasma physiology. Better for you than Earth ever was. We will support logistics, infrastructure, and sovereignty, but we will have the transition." The words didn't land like a threat. They landed like gravity, impersonal, inevitable, impossible to argue with on principle. Celica felt the room lean toward protest anyway. She spoke before the tide broke. "What if we refuse?" Admiral Hart's smile did not reach the silver flecks. "Then we will continue demonstrations until the Council concludes what I am trying to give you now. Certainty you cannot win without blood you do not wish to spend. We prefer mercy." She raised a wrist. The viewport darkened and widened. Jupiter woke. Not flame, no second sun, but bands of luminous script crawled across its storms, kilometers high, a slow, drifting text in languages the Triune had never seen. Hart narrated softly. "We are flying a lattice of fusion seeds through the upper atmosphere. The writing is plasma. When it fades, it leaves the weather unaltered. We came to show capability, not contempt." On the ghost-bright planet, a final line unfurled. Celica could not read it. She did not need to. She had watched enough young Thal trace vows into sand to know a promise when she saw one. After the meeting, alone in the shuttle's soft dark, Celica admitted the thought she had not allowed herself to think aloud. This wasn't conquest as she had been taught to fear it. It was reclamation with rules. That made it no less devastating. It might make it worse. The first Terran landers fell like patient comets, trailing no flame. They touched down in 17 sites from the Arctic shelf to the Kalahari, from the wreck routes of Old Cairo to the drowned caldera near Hawaii. They announced themselves the way good surgeons announce a cut, clearly, calmly, with care that does not mistake gentleness for weakness. Terran Reclamation Corps, First Wave, the speakers said in accents from 1,000 worlds, and yet unmistakably human. Begin ecosystem reversion in designated zones. Civilians please evacuate to marked safe distances. Enforcement will be non-lethal unless attacked. The machines they unfolded did not look like machines. Some were gardens of pipe organ stalks that sang in infrasonic chords. Some were forests of skeletal turbines that sifted air and returned it cleaner and older. Some were sleek, finned fish that drank seawater and exhaled chemistry the Thal had only ever seen in fossils. The humans called them symphony engines. They did not force Earth to be something else. They reminded it what it had been. A tower near New Manila lifted its crown and let a curtain of invisible mist out across the bay. Where it passed, algal strains tuned for Thal lungs dimmed, and native phytoplankton, long archived in crystal, woke like someone had whispered their names. On land, air sifters walked on spider legs and combed pollutants out of breeze, spooling carbon into black bricks that Terran children stacked like toys before robots carried them below to be buried in ancient basalt. The Triune resisted. Of course they did. The Mar tried to fracture supply lines across savanna corridors they had mapped for centuries, seeding the grass with microblades and tunneling under roads. The Solari rose in green storms and braided lightning into nets dense enough to peel armor. Celica herself led Thal units against coastal sites. In water, the Thal are born kings. They met Terrans who swam like tools had taught them how, gills opening at their necks, eyes warping to lens the blue, muscles anchored to bones threaded with carbon filaments, kicking with impossible torque. Weapons spoke. Thal hulls boiled where human beams laid paths through sea. Human armor flexed and scabbed over where Solari heat tried to bite. Sonic throats on Terran suits throttled more charge songs into dull air. And yet, again and again, Celica saw something stranger than victory. Restraint. When a Mer squad misjudged a flanking run, a Terran trooper simply stepped through them faster than sight and left them cocooned in foam that hardened into safety. When a Solari braid overloaded, a human, bareheaded and unarmored, caught the surge in her palms and bled light into the sand until the air stopped screaming. A Thal saboteur swam at one of the engines with a seed bomb meant to sour a whole river mouth. A human intercepted and did the unthinkable. He opened his helmet under 30 meters of water and shared breath with the saboteur through a rebreather graft. He wrote 4 words on the saboteur's arm with a glow pen. Go home. Live. The saboteur did. Why not finish us? Celica snarled over a private channel, dragging her injured lieutenant from a collapsing pier. You could turn our cities into steam. Admiral Hart's reply came a breath later, as if she had been waiting inside the question. Because we remember being refugees. Because the exile that remade us taught us to count costs you do not see. Because we do not need your dead, we need our home. The demonstrations continued, careful and colossal. Orbital mirrors unfurled for 20 minutes over the Great Barrier Shelf and warmed a square of sea by 2 degrees, just enough to time a coral spawn with a lunar window archived in a song 3 millennia old. On the Greenland margin, a fleet of drones stitched meltwater back into capillaries, convincing a dying glacier to slow. The point was never spectacle for its own sake. It was proof. We can undo and we can restore. On the 4th day, humans opened a dig in Old Nairobi. The site lay beneath a triune civic core, a park, a school, a museum grown from pearl stone where Thal children learned to sing currents and Marlarvi felt their first sun. Terran archaeologists moved with reverence that stung. They were not raiders, they were heirs. Celica watched from the perimeter as a woman in field blacks doctor. Ama Nwasu, badge Reed, rose from the pit carrying a crystal casket that glowed like it remembered dawn. Archive of seeds, she said over open channel, voice thrumming. Genetic templates, art, music, law, histories that survived file rot and pride. They left this for us, and we came back for it. She lifted another capsule and let a hollow field paint the air. Children on a beach under a sky empty of satellites, an old woman teaching bread to rise with patience, a woodworker planing cedar into a toy boat, a street of rain where strangers shared umbrellas. The images burned and would not leave. They were not weapons, but they did what weapons do. They changed what survival meant. That night the Triune High Council met and called what no one wanted to name: evacuation planning. Words tasted like failure. Logistics tasted like survival. The Mer argued for a staggered hive removal schedule and demanded guarantees about food chain stability on relocation worlds. The Solari wanted to see the stellar output curves of the promised atmospheres. The Thal asked for something smaller and more impossible, one more summer in certain bays so the last brood could imprint on smells they would never smell again. The council promised recordings. The Thal said gently that recordings are not tides. Celica drank brine tea and listened to the ocean. The surf hushed the city. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the engines exhaled a low chord and the air over the bay felt, for a heartbeat, exactly like it had in the oldest songs. It hurt like hope. It hurt like goodbye. Pride is an oar that cuts both ways. The Mer spoke of ancestral rights, the Solari of honor in voltage, and the Thal of currents that never yield without a whirl. Celica asked for an old clause from a dead treaty, the right of final contest. One chance to buy time. One chance to tell 3 billion souls that their leaders did not leave the table without spending everything they had. She broadcast at dawn from the seawall steps where New Manila met the Pacific. Single combat, terms to bind both sides. If our champion wins, you withdraw for a century and permit steward-led evacuation on our schedule. If yours wins, we surrender now and move under Terran protection without further resistance. No augmentation beyond native biology. Location, the surf. For an hour there was only the sound of water on stone. Then Admiral Hart walked down the steps with someone who did not look like a soldier. Dr. Ama Nwasu, the archaeologist from the dig, carried no weapon and wore field blacks dusted in coral grit. She paused to read the tide like a local. She smiled at a Solari child who was trying to look brave and succeeded badly. Celica's second hissed. "A trick." "Maybe," Celica said. She waded into the shallows. "Doctor, Commander," Nwasu replied and nodded to the sea. "Hand to hand, no augment tech beyond what we carry as biology. We prefer the surf. It is your element." Crowds gathered on the seawalls and in the windows. Drones hovered, obediently silent. The rules were recited. The tide surged once as if the ocean wished to see. Celica moved first. Thal reflex fast, flowing. Whole body a lever. Her palms spat bioelectric arcs that will stun a shark and stop a heart. Nwasu's skin took the charge and glowed. "Radiation acclimatization," she said conversationally, stepping aside so the second arc bit foam. "Storm belts around Wolfred worlds, we adapted. Kick, feint, drown, grip." Celica dragged the human under and used depth as a fist. Nwasu rolled like a seal, fingers finding a notch under Celica's shoulder blade. Joints unmade themselves and then remembered who they were when Nwasu let them. Zero-G combatives, low oxygen work, high gravity thresholds. We learned to be students of pressure. She did not gloat, she taught. Every counter was a syllabus, every release was a grade, pass, not yet, try again. It felt obscene to be taught while losing one's world. Celica tried pride. "Your species burned its sky and fled. You speak of oaths. I see failure rewritten as destiny." Nwasu's face did not harden, it softened. "We failed, yes. Then we learned. Learning is how we translate grief into a future." She caught Celica's wrist and with a thumb and breath collapsed the electric organ in a way that paused pain rather than made it. "We came back because the dead asked us to. We intend to keep our promises to them and to you." Final gambit. Celica gathered the full storm in her body and let it through every nerve. The surge boiled the top inch of sea. Enwasu took it into both hands, bent it through the water like a conductor bends a phrase, and bled the residue into sand. Then she stepped close and set 2 fingers gently at the hinge of Celica's jaw. The world went white, then quiet, then reachable again, but from the floor of the tide pool. Enwasu was already backing away, palms open. Non-lethal neural override, borrowed from 17 species that tried to kill us and taught us better. She offered Celica a hand up. Celica took it because stubbornness has a spine but also a brain. The seawall had fallen silent. Even the Mer had stopped their wing chitter. Admiral Hart's voice carried, low and respectful. "Terms hold. Do you yield?" Salt stung Celica's throat. Around her symphony engine's side, in the distance, a pod of Terran schoolchildren, offloaded from one of the new colony ships, judging by the cut of their uniforms, were learning to read a beach. They ran their fingers through wet sand and shouted at the tiny crabs that pretended to be stones. They were laughing. It sounded like home, which was the worst of it. "I yield," Celica said, and the word felt both like drowning and like air after too long under. "We will move our people under Terran protection. You will keep your promises." "We will," Hart said. "We always meant to." She looked past Celica to the city. 3 relocation arcs lift in 2 days. Ocean World's first, Yori Blue, Pelion, and St. Elmo. Hive continents prepped on Makond and Kayem. Solari atmospheres charged on Argent Belt. All transport, fuel, medical, and food stocks are ours until your supply lines sing on their own. You will not travel as beggars. Celica swayed with the tide and with the math of everything that would now happen fast. Registers to compile, elders to convince, children to hold while they cried, songs to record so that a sound could survive a light year. She turned once to the Pacific as if it could answer the question no politics could. How do you leave a thing that made you? The sea, being old, said only, "By living," she nodded. "Then let us begin." They called them arcs because the word was older than ships and kinder than evacuation. 3 silver crescents hung over New Manila's dawn like patient moons, each wide enough to swallow a stadium and quiet enough to make birds keep singing. The triune broadcast schedules that looked like weather maps, colored streams fanning from neighborhoods to docks, time slots arranged so families would not be torn into different lines. The Mer packed their nursery broods into honeycombed cradles that pulsed with temperature control. The Solari condensed themselves into bottled auroras that hummed lullabies in the key of storm. The Thal brought water, carried jars, taste stones, and bowls carved from mother coral, to decant a final sip of home into their mouths before leaving gravity behind. Terrans met them at every gate. None wore parade armor. They wore the fabric that flowed with work, the steady hands of nurses and riggers, the calm of firefighters who have already seen the worst night a city can have and still show up when the sirens start. They checked lists, answered the same questions 1,000 different ways, said yes, whenever yes could be honest, and said no gently when physics or treaty refused to bend. Will the new seas taste right? A Thal elder asked a woman in field blacks whose braid was threaded with bits of copper wire. "We tuned salinity and trace minerals against your samples," the woman answered, tapping her slate to expand a profile of Yori Blue's currents. "It won't be identical, nothing is, but the first tide will feel like a friend you forgot you missed. Can I bring the streetlight that flickers outside my window?" A Mer child asked a Marine taller than 2 Mer stacked. "You can bring the habit of looking for it," the Marine said, and then because he could, he knelt and unscrewed the tiny globe from a Terran toolkit and handed it over. "This one is a spare, for the new window." Not everyone came peaceably. A Solari splinter, young, bright, burning with the particular righteousness that believes history can be bullied, planned to overload a symphony engine near the harbor and turn the bay into a roiling bruise of steam. Celica learned of it an hour before ignition, a whisper in a current, a tremor in a Mer patrol's wing. She ran. She found them on the seawall, palms already crackling, faces lit from within with the dangerous glow of certainty. "Don't," she said, not with command voice, but with the voice you use for someone standing on a roof edge. They will not answer with massacre. They will answer by saving who they can and by locking the rest of us down so tightly that we leave with less than we could have taken. You are not buying dignity. You are pawning it. The leader sneered, young, beautiful, tired. They took our world. They are taking it back, Celica said, the words cut from bone. And today we are not choosing owners. We are choosing who we are when we lose. Help me load a child's crate and you will have more power over the future than if you burn a bay. It should not have worked. It did. They came with her like thunder that decided to be rain. At Dock 9, Dr. Ama Nwasu stood with a case that hummed softly under 3 seals. For you, she told Celica, with Admiral Hart's authorization. Celica opened it expecting a weapon. It was a library the size of a lunchbox. Triune languages, songs, recipes, migration maps, hive architecture, Solari poetry coded in wavelengths. We took copies of everything our scanners could swallow, Nwasu said. You will not arrive poor. You're giving us ourselves, Celica whispered. We are returning what you made here, Nwasu corrected gently, and asking for what we made here before you. On the causeway, a Terran orchestra played. Not a grand stage, just workers stealing minutes between shifts, a trumpet, a battered drum, a violin that had seen 5 continents. The melody wasn't triune and wasn't ancient human. It was the sort of tune that moves boxes faster and makes small children hop in place. Celica caught herself smiling and hated it for half a breath, then let it happen. Mercy sometimes sounds like music you didn't ask for and find yourself needing. She boarded the first ark that would carry Thal Elders to Yori Blue as liaison and witness. Admiral Hart met her at the threshold with a handshake that this time felt like a covenant. Steward seal, Hart said, sliding a ring into Celica's palm, metal warm, etched with a wave, a hex, and a lightning stroke. It formalizes your authority to speak for those still leaving. It formalizes my obligation to listen. The ark lifted on a column of air so soft the gulls barely staggered. Earth rolled beneath them, mangrove green, roof red, road gray, sea blue like a promise kept, and Celica pressed her forehead to the glass. She did not pray. She counted. Docks, pylons, faces, waves. Counting was another kind of prayer. When the ark kissed orbit, the dark opened like a cathedral roof. Hundreds of Terran ships glittered in lanes so precise it hurt, and farther out the black was already seeded with inbound lights. Hart had called them homecoming ships. Celica thought of them as porch lights left on for 3,000 years. She did not look away. Relocation is a logistics problem until it isn't. You can manifest crates, plot arcs, solve for fuel, and still be ambushed by a smell. On Yori Blue, the first Thal to touch water cried at the way a certain current turned left around a basalt knuckle that had never existed before and yet felt inevitable. On Makond, a Merqueen tipped her head back under a sky with 3 pale moons and decided deliberately to call that pattern home. On the Argent Belt, the Solari unbottled themselves into skies that hummed like power lines and laughed in voices that set dust dancing. Celica returned to Earth on a shuttle with Nwasu 2 weeks later to sign the 3rd tranche of departure guarantees. She expected paperwork. Hart brought her to Quito. The old city clung to its mountain like a memory refusing rain. The Reclamation Corps had not raised glass spires or paved the slopes in light. They had cleared, mended, and then stepped back. In a plaza surrounded by walls that had seen revolutions and weddings and a century where food was a line, Hart stopped at a round of stone laid into the ground. It looked like an ordinary well cap until you read it with your hands, grooves worn by generations, scratches filled with brass. This is where their council swore exile, Nwasu said quietly. Not the politicians, those came later. Teachers, nurses, farmers, shipwrights, a kid who hacked satellite time to broadcast the first we go together. They stood here and promised 3 things in a dozen languages. We will leave before we break this world beyond repair. We will return when we can be good ancestors, and we will not let the dark make us cruel. Hart touched the brass with 2 fingers like someone touching a headstone. We call it the Quito Oath. We teach it before we teach the alphabet. Celica knelt. The stone was warm. She could hear traffic and vendors, and the laugh of someone telling a joke they loved to tell. Beneath that, if you put your cheek to the ground and let your body listen, there was another noise, a hum too low to be voice and too steady to be chance. Enwasu smiled. The oath ring is built on a vibration damper we turned into a resonator during the Exodus. It has been singing the same note for 3,000 years. Babies napped here while their parents signed departure papers. Lovers carved initials. The first starship math was taught at that fountain. She pointed at a little square of blue where teenagers now flirted with the heroic seriousness of teenagers. It is not a shrine to perfection, Hart said. We failed 1,000 ways in exile. We broke hearts and treaties and sometimes each other. We learned. Learning is a form of apology you can prove. Why show me this? Celica asked, aware that it sounded like accusation. It was hunger. Because treaties made in rooms can feel like chess, Hart said. I want you to see the kitchen table where the promise was cooked. It tastes different. They walked the city. At a school, children traced constellations on a ceiling that had once been a warehouse roof. At a clinic, a nurse calibrated a sensor that could smell infections a day before a fever and hummed to a patient because humming helps. In an alley, a boy practiced a speech about heroes that made Enwasu cry and then laugh at herself. In a warehouse turned archive, Celica watched techs cradle cylinders like newborns. The labels were plain: songs, river/songs, work/songs, war/lullabies. She thought of the case Enwasu had given her at Dock 9 and understood it differently. Humans did not just keep what they loved, they engineered its survival. Will you engineer ours? She asked as they stood on a balcony that looked out toward a ribbon of distant cloud that might have been the sea. We already are, Hart said. The reciprocity accords you signed have a clause not many noticed: cultural sanctuaries. We'll maintain 3 triune sanctums on Earth indefinitely, 1 oceanic, 1 hive, 1 atmospheric. They're not settlements. They're living museums you govern. Your pilgrims can visit with visas. Our kids can learn without stealing. Celica flinched. You would let our song live in your house. Hart's grin was sudden and for the first time unarmored. Stewardship cut both ways. Commander, you left this world better than you found it. We would be poor hosts if we didn't admit we learned to be better because you were here. They ended the day on a rooftop where the air tasted of rain and roasted corn. Enwasu produced 3 cups and a small bottle. Tradition where I'm from, she said, pouring a measure into each. When you finish a hard thing, you drink and you name the next right thing. Celica sniffed. The liquid smelled like sun and smoke. She sipped. It burned, then became sweet like a forgiveness she didn't know she needed. The next right thing? Hart asked, eyes on the far blue. Celica surprised herself. Teach me to read the oath. She tapped the brass, not with my hands, with my heart. Hart's nod was crisp as a salute and soft as a sigh. We start at dawn. They said the first wave would be measured in millions. Celica believed the planners until she watched the sky forget how not to bloom. The homecoming fleet arrived in pulses like a heartbeat, lanes knitting and unknitting in a choreography that made air traffic controllers weep and poets write about sewing. Every ship carried a neighborhood. Bakers, welders, midwives, choir directors, hydrologists, the person everyone goes to when their sink won't stop dripping. They disembarked with the focused joy of people who had memorized the smell of a place they had never seen. Symphony engines shifted from triage to craft. Restoration became art. In the Amazon basin, Terrans planted mangrove nurseries as if they were setting up a festival. Tarps, laughter, recipes traded over fences. In the Midwest plains, grass returned in waves and bison-eyed drones with the betrayed dignity of elders asked to pose for cameras. In the Pacific Northwest, rain fell the way old stories said it would, not as punishment, but as punctuation to a sentence the land had needed to finish. Celica divided her days between ports and classrooms. At docks, she settled disputes over cargo slots with the authority of someone who knew how many toothbrushes a hive needs per day. In schools, she told triune folk tales to children who had never seen a merwing or a solari braid except in books. and now wanted to draw them on their lunch bags. She taught the Thal Tide Table song to a roomful of 8-year-olds who sang it louder than was strictly respectful and exactly as respectfully as joy requires. Crisis visited anyway because history never vacates a building cleanly. A rogue triune captain, refusing to accept surrender, his hive nearly empty, his mind hollowed by loss until it rang like a bottle, stole a tug and threw it at a reclamation tower on the New Manila seawall. The tug carried enough fuel to scar a coastline. Terran defense could have turned it to mist without breaking a sweat. Hart didn't give that order. She called Celica. "You can stop him," Hart said simply. "He will hear you if anyone will." Celica ran. She caught the tug on a battered skiff with an engine that coughed like an old dog and a hull that had been patched more times than it had been built. She drew alongside and shouted into a loudhailer until her throat bled. She talked about babies who'd been born on arcs and needed stories more than martyrs. She talked about tides that not even grief can bully into turning the wrong way. She talked about what courage looks like when winning is off the table. He cut throttle with a broken sob. Terran drones laced the tug in soft nets. The tower lived, no street filled with smoke. Celica sat on the dock afterward with her feet in the water and her head in her hands while a human paramedic wrapped her throat and said nothing because some silence is medicine. Later that night, at the newly established Oceanic Sanctuary, 30 kilometers of reef and bay declared forever triune, Nwasu met Celica at the gate with a package. "From Yori Blue," she said. "They asked me to deliver it because they were busy inventing a word for the way moonlight looks there." Celica opened it. Inside, a flask of Yori Blue seawater and a braided cord of marsilk and solari filament. A note, awkward and perfect. "Bring a cup of home to home. Tie it to the new pilings. Sing once for us." They went to the pilings at low tide. Celica poured Yori Blue into earth and watched the swirl. She tied the braid. She sang. Her voice wasn't beautiful. It didn't need to be. Nwasu hummed the harmony without knowing the language because kindness translates. The next morning, Terran kids came to the sanctuary on a field trip. Celica waded out with them to kneel over tide pools. "This one looks empty," a boy said, peering into a bowl of water that reflected only sky. "Look sideways," Celica told him. "Home is often visible at the edge." He tilted his head. A tiny crab smaller than a freckle lifted a claw of pure theater. The boy gasped, then laughed as if he'd caught Jupiter riding again. That afternoon, Hart signed the last clearance for the Mercolonies to depart Makond. The ceremony was small by design, like a family eating the last meal at a house before a move. Floor picnic. Paper plates, stories that get told badly on purpose because everyone already knows them by heart. When the marships lifted, the high voices wove a chord into the air that made the hair on Celica's arms rise. Hart watched with a smile you wear at graduations. "Will you miss us?" Celica asked, surprising herself by how much she wanted the answer to be yes. "We already do," Hart said. "Missing is proof something mattered." 1 year to the day from the contest at the surf, Celica stood on a platform above a forest that had been a rumor. The canopy of the restored Amazon ran to the horizon in a green that made you feel you had been thirsty a long time and hadn't noticed. Terran children ran along a boardwalk, counting frogs with the solemnity of scientists and the inefficiency of joy. In the understory, symphony engines slept more than they sang now. Their work had shifted from resurrection to maintenance, from miracle to habit. The platform was the site chosen for the signing of the Blue Chorus Treaty, a document whose clauses read like a lesson plan for how to be neighbors after a war no one fought. It enshrined the sanctuaries as sovereign cultural ground. It set up reciprocal apprenticeships, triune engineers on Terran River projects, Terran medics in Merbrood clinics, Solari artists teaching Terran kids to draw lightning without flinching. It codified a calendar of shared days, one for the Keto Oath, one for the Triune's first sunrise on Yori Blue, one for the lost who never made it off-world 3,000 years ago, and one for the lost who left last year. Admiral Hart wore dress blacks this time, her hair shot with more silver, her face line-mapped by work. Enwasu arrived 10 minutes late with mud on her boots and a box under her arm because archives don't carry themselves. Celica wore the steward's ring and a necklace made by a merchild from Makond who had decided shells were better than rubies. Hart spoke first, her voice steady as a metronome. We do not sign this because we are perfect. We sign it because we intend to practice being better in public where it counts. Celica read her part in a thal cadence that made even the Terran's flat vowels sound like surf. We give this world back to those who kept a promise through a night longer than our species has names for. We ask for memory, for access, for protection of our children when they return to learn where they came from and where they did not. Enwasu added the preamble written by a committee of schoolchildren from 5 continents and 3 species, because absurdity is occasionally the shortest road to truth. We live here. Some of us just got here. Some of us were here and left and came back. Some of us came and left. We want to be good at sharing because the universe is enormous and also somehow small. They signed, pens scratched, drones whispered, the forest breathed. Somewhere a monkey made a sound like a hinge celebrating. After the ceremony, Hart and Celica walked a path cut carefully so it did not bully the understory. Do you regret the contest? Hart asked. Not a trap, not a test, just a friend wanting to know how a story lands when told from both sides. No, Celica said. It bought us a century and a day even if the math says otherwise. It let my people see that losing did not mean we were smaller. It let me see that winning did not make you monstrous. Hart nodded. I replay it some nights. Not because I doubt the outcome, because I want to remember the posture you took when you stood up after I touched your jaw. Dignity is a lesson my species learns and forgets and learns again. They reached a small clearing where a Terran class was planting young trees raised from seeds cataloged in the old Nairobi archive. The teacher, tattoos, laugh lines, voice that could call a room back from chaos with one word, handed Celica a sapling like someone handing over a baton. Would you like to plant one for the sanctuaries? She asked. Celica knelt. She set the sapling into soil that hummed with more life than any ledger could inventory. Enwasu poured water from a Yori blue flask. Hart pressed earth around the trunk with hands that had signed too many orders and still knew how to help something stand. Later, Celica dictated her annual report to the Galactic Council. She did not waste flourish. Humanity has returned, she said. They are not what they were, they are more. Consider this an invitation and a warning. They keep promises. They extend hands even when they do not have to. They move planets without losing tenderness. They will forgive quickly and not forget at all. She ended not with threat or flattery, but with an address. To any species that assumed a dead world means a dead people, count better. To any child who hears this on a ship inbound to Sol, when you step onto the blue, remember you are walking into a house held by an oath. Take off your shoes, look up, breathe. You are home or you are in someone's. Behave accordingly. At dusk, the forest caught the light and threw it back in colors that did not have names before this day. Symphony engines played a chord so gentle that only animals with excellent ears and children heard it. A breeze brought salt from far away, proof that the ocean still tutored the land. Listen, Enwasu said. Celica did. It sounded like 3 peoples singing in different languages and finding, not by accident, the same note. It sounded like a porch light left on. It sounded like a promise landing. The stars looked different now, not because they had changed, but because the people under them had.